Hello everybody, welcome to our presentation. My name is Jim Patterson from Wickersoft. We will be telling you more about our company and our offerings later in the presentation, but today's topic is Agile PPM, when your teams are agile but leadership thinks waterfall. We will discuss how bimodal/hybrid organizations or solutions that can address the needs of different constituencies in an organization. We'll also show how it can be done via solution demonstration as well. Before we get started, we have a few quick logistics to go over with you. First off, we will not open up the line for questions. All lines will be muted during the webinar. However, we will answer questions that are captured in the chat and question panel throughout today's presentation should you have any. You can also feel free to email us directly and we'll be happy to answer your questions as well. We'll be giving you our contact information and we'll get the introductions there done here shortly. Also, if for some reason you get distracted or pulled away during the webinar, no need to worry. We'll be distributing the recording of today's presentation to all registrants following the webinar. And with that, let's get started with the presentation. Agile PPM, when your teams are agile, but leadership thinks waterfall. The agenda today, we're going to talk about the challenges that we're addressing in the marketplace today. We're also going to talk about unified work management concepts. We'll also then be talking about the concepts of bimodal PPM, and then we'll wrap that up with some demonstration of those concepts in action. We'll also follow that up with some additional use cases that can be addressed, and then talk about the value and benefits that we've seen and kind of summarize that at the end. And then we'll talk about next steps and ways that you might be able to pursue this in your organizations. So let's first talk about today's challenges. With the rise of technology today, most organizations are now really essentially becoming software companies. If we look at the industries that have changed over time through technology, the old brick and mortar department stores have really been supplanted in a lot of ways by the digital rise of Amazon. The old blockbuster video that we used to have has been supplanted by Netflix. The old taxi model is definitely being taken over by the digital and application-driven Uber. Even in fast food restaurants, we're even ordering soft drinks using digital technology today. The idea is that the leaders in today's marketplace are really innovating and delivering their products and services to their consumers and customers in a variety of different ways. And this means being able to deliver technology to differentiate ourselves. And when we differentiate ourselves, we can then become market leaders leveraging that technology. What this does is it breeds a lot of change in the way that we're delivering product and in embracing software development and using things like agile approaches. And it doesn't just affect the software development organization. It really affects executives and the way they're going to plan and how they're going to go to market and the things they're going to select to invest in as a company. The PMOs have a variety of different types of projects, not just traditional projects and infrastructure types of things, but managing things and other methodologies and approaches like Agile. And then people have to support this technology going through so that we can serve our customer bases. So it really is a widespread impact on this rise of technology and how we're all essentially, even what's considered non-technical businesses are oftentimes, driven by technology. So ultimately what this means is that we're putting a lot of systems in place and a lot of tools in place in organizations to manage all these different types of work. Represented in these silos are just three major ones that we run across in the marketplace. In the center, we have project management, which is really meant to depict traditional project management, things that we do in a more waterfall fashion using things like Microsoft Project or SharePoint to manage these types of projects. Traditional projects like infrastructure projects and other things that we do for the business. There's also the application management side of things where we're doing software development, either for new software development for new products or for enhancements to existing products that we have. And more organizations are using agile approaches to do that. And they're starting to use tools and have been using tools that have been designed primarily to support that agile methodology, using things like Visual Studio with TFS or Visual Studio Team Services in the cloud. JIRA, version 1, just to name some of the more popular ones that people are using out there. And they tend to be using those separately and distinctly from what's happening in the traditional project management realm. And then you have the service management pieces. We won't go into that in depth today, but the more ad hoc, unplanned work, the more unstructured work, incidents, problems, changes, requests that come in things like Microsoft Dynamics, Service Cloud, or ServiceNow. Some of the popular ones are out there. These are generating workloads as well. Ultimately, companies are putting in separate solutions that are siloed and separate pieces of information in the organizations for these different types of work, and even supplementing these things with self-created spreadsheets and other things. The idea is we've got parallel disconnected processes, and a resource who has to do work in these realms can oftentimes have to monitor and participate in a half a dozen tools in order to see all the work that's on their plate and make sure that they're delivering as expected. So these technology-driven challenges do, have some effect. And the idea is that the result of these things can be that you don't have the visibility that you need. You don't have the coordination and the collaboration and the communication between the parts of your organization that are having to support the customer. It results in poorer customer service. People are not clear on what the priorities are, maybe not necessarily. The idea is these information silos can have negative effects in the way we execute in our businesses. And then ultimately what this does is put artificial barriers between us internally in our organizations, and potentially barriers like this wall between us and our customers. And it can result in things like low response times, information silos, no consistent processes. It can actually frustrate our people internally, so we can have confused and unhappy employees working on these things, which can result in turnover, which is always a negative impact to an organization. The idea is that having disconnected systems and processes can breed and or exacerbate this situation. So we need to find ways to bring this together and mitigate these issues. And the challenges aren't isolated to any particular role in the organization. If we think about, the project managers, they may not have visibility into efforts that are not traditional project management, say in the PPM solution. So they may not have ready visibility into, say, the Agile schedules or the workloads that are being done in operations to do production support that may impact the ability of those resources to be available for projects. And it doesn't allow them to respond quickly enough to changes, etc. Executives, may be difficult for them to get a holistic view of all of their investments in the organization and get visibility into strategic alignment and how things are progressing with those investments. The development organization, since they are using different tools for planning in those software development environments, they may be challenged by having to do duplicate effort to feed up the chain and get visibility as needed manually up to executives or to the PMO, for example. And then obviously, from a support perspective, not knowing what's coming down the pike oftentimes can lead to them being blindsided a little bit on what they have to support when it becomes available and when things go into production. So these are just some things that happen when you have these disconnected systems. And here today in this webinar, we're going to talk about how we can help that situation. So let's talk about the concept of unified work management first and foremost. Being that there's all these different types of work around the organization, that's kind of horizontally spread out by different types of work. But also, if you think about this from a hierarchical perspective, there is a top-down, bottoms-up approach to work management as well. Organizations need to come up with their strategies and put together strategic plans, enterprise architectures, maybe doing innovation and ideation to plan out roadmaps and new product development focus like that. The idea is that these strategies are usually put in place by senior management to guide the company in the direction and their areas of focus. And those are the things that we are driving to ultimately determine the success of our companies or organizations moving forward. Once those things are decided, you get down to this program and portfolio management level where these things are broken down or fulfilled by defining initiatives and objectives and applications or products that we're going to come out with, or doing quality approaches and things like Lean Six Sigma to determine how we're going to get there and get there in a more quality fashion from a process perspective. And then ultimately those get broken down into things that we have to execute on, whether it be projects internally, say in IT, billable projects externally for our customers, things that we're responding to like service requests, even getting down to the whole to-do level item level of granularity. Ultimately, we have to execute on those things well and be working on the right things at that level to support up and making sure that our programs and our portfolios of projects are actually succeeding. And ultimately, if we're not working on those things well together, then we're not supporting the strategies and executing and fulfilling those strategies and meeting those goals and objectives. So the idea is it's all tied in from a top-down and bottoms-up perspective, as well as horizontally across all the different types of work in your organization. So let's look at a sample enterprise work management lifecycle. If you look up in the top at the portfolio level, today we're going to talk about a portfolio management solution in Microsoft Project Online that really will manage and get visibility into the entire portfolio of projects and work that senior management and the PMO is responsible for tracking and maintaining. Now, for work to get in there, there's an upfront process through a planning cycle. And ultimately, folks are doing high-level enterprise modeling, defining financial and operational targets, and then when they define those objectives and the projects and programs they think that are going to support those objectives, we have to then size those and have subject matter experts define how we're going to get those things done. And at the execution level, to define those things, more and more people are using a variety of different tools to detail these things out and execute on these projects. For example, Microsoft Project on the left, Office 365 Planner and Wunderlist, soon to be replaced by Microsoft To-Dos, Visual Studio with TFS or Visual Studio Team Services in the cloud, JIRA for Agile and issue tracking, version 1 for Agile. The idea is that the teams are then planning to execute and maybe even do an initial sizing and scoping of the work to support those larger initiatives in these different tool sets. And then ultimately the feedback comes up to the organization where they have to approve that work and then execute on that from an entire portfolio that's been approved and vetted. Now ultimately, providing the right tool for the job, according to Gartner Group, is really what it's all about. It's really about putting the best of breed tools in place and getting the right tool for the job. Now at the portfolio level, Project Online can meet that need. It's really designed to have folks to be able to create and provide decision frameworks for selecting projects and then putting the frameworks in place for tracking those investments at a very high level and understanding whether our investments are tracking well or not or as planned. At the execution level, you're really interested in project and resource managers and the team members to manage the tactical details of project execution and communicate progress and expenditures back to leadership within the organization. And this is where the goal is saying get the right tool for the job, get the one that's appropriate for the type of work that you're doing, for the level of maturity and capabilities of the organization and their ability to sustain. And that's why the variety of tools and those silos are coming about. So in today's model, we really want to take that business strategy and tie it to work execution. So if you look at that top green bar, it really is meant to represent the capabilities of Project Online as an end-to-end project and portfolio management solution. All the way from the front end of demand management, which is really that intake of ideas, maybe formalized requests and business cases, and then all the way through portfolio management where we're doing intelligent selection to make sure that we're working on the right things. And then portfolio visibility throughout the life cycle of those items. And then all the execution, whether it be resource management, schedule management, the financial management pieces of those, time reporting and management, and then ultimately all the business intelligence and analytics that you're going to want through the entire life cycle of that project. And the idea is that Project Online is really doing a nice job of providing all of those capabilities to manage a portfolio. Now that being said, on board natively, if you look down the left side branch of this diagram, Microsoft Project or Project Web Access, which is the browser version of that, allows you to do very nicely, natively, waterfall planning within Project Online. And the idea that nothing more needs to be done. You can provide plans and schedules and resource allocations and things like that, and that feeds very nicely up into the portfolio management solution. Where things separate a little bit is when people are needing to do different methodologies, using things like Agile, and maybe using even separate tools for that Agile. In this case, we'll talk about Visual Studio or JIRA, for example. And the idea is they'll execute on those tools, and Project Connect from Wickersoft, an integration platform, gives you the ability to feed the information from those other tools directly into the portfolio for visibility in a variety of different ways, allowing you to have a mix of types of projects and methodologies within the system. And then down the right-hand side, you're looking at lighter weight project management tools for folks that don't have robust needs for complex plans and schedules, but still need to plan out things in things like Office 365 Planner or SharePoint, for example, and be able to have the results of those and the information from those feeding seamlessly through Project Connect into Project Online as well. The idea is having one central portfolio of visibility, yet the choice in an organization to use the tools that make the most sense to execute it. So let's focus on the Bi-modal PPM use case, which is really focusing on that Agile component. In 2015, the Gartner Group introduced this term called Bi-modal IT. And it's really defined as the practice of managing two separate and coherent modes of IT delivery. One is focused on stability and the other on agility. And they define that as modes 1 and modes 2. Mode 1 is really that linear approach, that traditional PPM governance-driven type of approach. Its analogy is that of a marathon runner, usually driven and geared towards longer cycle times and using approaches like Waterfall in your project planning and execution. This is often what is used at the PMO level and reported up to leadership to track projects, etc. But today, there is a State of Agile survey current in the last year that's done by version 1, says that today that more than 90% of organizations are doing Agile somewhere in their organization. And the idea is that number keeps growing on an annual basis. And Agile is really a more nonlinear approach, more iterative approach. And it's really about speed, agility, and responding to change. And this iterative approach, delivering in smaller iterations and chunks, is really more of an analogy of a sprinter with shorter cycle times and delivering in smaller increments. And the idea that using things like Agile, Scrum, Lean, and Kanban approaches are what people are doing to address that Agile need so that we can innovate, respond to the marketplace quicker, and deliver things more frequently and more reliably as we go on through. Now, this really isn't an either-or proposition. There is really a rationale for having both of these modes within an organization and using the mode that's appropriate for the type of work that's being done. Now, today, in this disconnected systems and processes model we talked about earlier on, here's just some of the symptoms that happen in this disconnection. For example, for the PMO using the traditional PPM approach, sometimes with the separate systems and tools being used, Agile can often be a black hole to the PMO, meaning they have no real-time visibility into the business deliverables when the teams are using Agile. And then their charge to really bring and deliver a holistic portfolio view to leadership on how those investments are tracking tends to be a very manual process for them to gather data from a variety of different systems and compile it into a common view. From an Agile team's perspective, they're looking at that governance-driven PPM process as maybe as overhead that's slowing down the reason they went to Agile in the first place. And the idea is how can they deliver and maintain their agility, yet meet the needs of the organization and of leadership that the PMO is looking to serve. Oftentimes this manifests itself in the Agile teams having to provide duplicate entry on things like time and progress, or even providing status reports outside of what they're doing in their delivery in the Agile tools to make sure the needs of leadership is being met. So the idea is that it's not ideal in most cases for a lot of organizations. So the idea is to really find the right balance. How do we get just enough governance, insight, alignment, and control, but yet provide the needed amount of agility for innovation and getting time to market and being responsive to changes as they arise. And the idea is that the approach that we're going to talk about today really addresses that blend. So in a unified PPM and Agile solution, you may have a singular portfolio management solution with one or more portfolios addressed in there. And these programs or product lines or business units could then have projects within them that could be a mix of traditional projects and Agile projects regardless of where the system of record or what the tool is being used for execution. And this is really the new hybrid project management world because there is a disparate set of needs across the different constituencies in an organization. So there's a number of different approaches we can take to this, and this is the things that Wickersoft is bringing to the marketplace in conjunction with Microsoft. There is the use case where you can actually use Microsoft Project Online, and Project Online in all use cases is really designed to be the portfolio management solution where all the program and portfolio management capabilities are being executed. It's where all the investment approval would happen on the intake and the governance process. Any financial or capacity planning that's done for these investments would be tracked and itemized up at this level as well. But in this scenario right here, you could do traditional waterfall scheduling in Project Online using the onboard tools that are there. And then you can also use tools that are provided by Wickersoft to do some Agile development or some Agile planning and tracking within Project Online itself. And we'll show some of that during the course of the demonstration. So one model is to do this holistically and solely within the Project Online solution. Now, this is great if people haven't already committed to using other Agile tools within their organization, and at least there's this option for people to use within the Microsoft solution. Alternatively, when people are using other tools and they've already adopted other Agile tools, you might have the need here where the same Project Online proposition is there at the portfolio management level, but then you might do your waterfall plans or more traditional project schedules and plans in the onboard native Microsoft project or Project Web Access. But then you may be doing your more iterative-based planning, building your product backlogs and planning out your iterations and your sprints and your user stories, etc., and having that be done in a more visual board fashion over in Visual Studio. And the idea here is that the teams that are using Visual Studio in this scenario should be able to do all the things that they're normally doing the way they normally do it, but have Project Connect from Wickersoft automatically pick up that information and provide that as updates to the portfolio in Project Online without them having to do anything unnatural in their process. This same use case also applies if you're using something like JIRA. The idea would be is that certain projects you would determine this would be a project that's being managed in JIRA, and the information that's updated by the teams, whether it's their progress or time or other information that's updated in the Agile solution, it would flow back through an automated integration that actually brings that information up to the portfolio level. And I think what's key here is that oftentimes it's not just moving of the data, it's translating that data into a form and format that makes sense to leadership. For example, in the Agile teams, as they're working on a particular project or a sprint, they may be looking at some Agile metrics and approaches as they're looking to track and execute on their projects. For example, they may be looking at burn-ups and burn-downs, velocity charts, and cumulative flow diagrams about scope, and other Agile types of approaches and measures to track how they're doing on a particular iteration or effort. Now, where leadership can vary is they're often used to looking at traditional metrics on project investments, like how are we doing on a schedule basis, on a cost basis, on resource utilization, what's the overall health. We're looking at red, yellow, green type of indicators for those things with maybe some drill down capability. And the idea is, if that's what they want to see, how do we get there without having to manually transcribe that information and provide visuals to leadership? And the idea is with Project Connect, we can do that without having to manually make those updates on each and every reporting or status cycle. We also have an opportunity, if we bring these systems together by integrating, that we can actually get more holistic resource capacity planning. If separate tools are being used to do different types of work, getting a comprehensive view of resource demand and resource availability is very difficult without doing manual compiling and mashing up of that data. We have the opportunity through Project Connect to bring in capacity planning information from all the different tools, whether it be JIRA, Project Online, Visual Studio, etc., and get a holistic view of all planned work so that we can look at what the real demand is across all that, even though we're using separate tool sets. Now, some folks may be planning resources at a different level, maybe at a very tactical task level, some at a high level capacity planning, kind of FTE or percentages of allocation level. Irrespective of that, we can bring that data together for comprehensive view so we can make better decisions on what it is we can actually execute on. Also, from a time reporting perspective, this is a big one. It's hard enough to get people to report time in a timesheet one time, let alone asking them to provide status and or time multiple times. So for example, a portfolio management solution like Project Online would have a native onboard timesheet capability. And the idea is that people can put their time in there for all their different types of projects, work, and non-project work, and submit those at the end of a reporting period, typically a week. Now, if people are living in a software development environment in their more agile development or software development environment like Visual Studio shown here, you can actually put in the time spent or actual effort expended within the tool that you're living in this case Visual Studio Team Services, and have that information flow and automatically populate the timesheet appropriately in the timesheet system that the organization is using as a system of record to track the investments and the actuals. The idea is that they would just do this in the tool that they live in this case Visual Studio, and only have to update things in the timesheet that might not be in there, maybe like admin time or things like that, or possibly submit the timesheet. But the idea here is they don't have to go to more than one place, and they can live in the primary tool that they typically work in. Then ultimately, because we're bringing all this data together on an automated basis with Project Connect, we can get very good comprehensive reporting. And I think the real strength is comprehensive reporting that becomes just a natural output of the process. Creating these reports no longer have to be a project in and of themselves, meaning if we keep our data up to date in the various tool sets that we're using, let's just say in this case it was JIRA, Visual Studio, and Project Online, they would come together so we get comprehensive portfolio view with all the requisite red, yellow, green status reporting, all the different resource information as far as capacity versus demand and actuals, and even isolate potentially the agile metrics as well that our agile teams want to see. So the key here is the payback is that information is going to be readily available for decision support to satisfy the needs of leadership and allowing us to remain more heads down in what we're doing on developing and delivering value. So with that, let's get into a demonstration. All right, so now we're in Microsoft Project Online. And for those of you that aren't familiar, it really does become part of an Office 365 user experience. So if your company does use Office 365 today for mail and your business productivity tools like Office and etc., the idea here is that it does become just part of your Office 365 experience and part of that waffle of applications and services that have become available to that. It is licensed separately, but it does become an integrated part of that overall experience. It is not a prerequisite to have Office 365 in order to use Project Online. You can just use Project Online and it'd be up in the Microsoft Cloud just the same. But the idea here is that we're actually looking at this view in a project center, which is a holistic view of all of the projects that you're tracking within the organization. Now, it's very flexible on the views that you would have on this. In this case, I have a more lifecycle view of what stage the different projects are in, requested, approved, or in progress. KPIs that are available on things like overall, schedule health, issue health, etc. And these can be either formula driven, so to be automatically updated, or they can be selected and manually selected, and you might have some combination of those. And all the data and metrics that you're tracking regarding your projects will summarize based upon the views that you have here and the way you have the groupings. And the idea here is that you have no limit on the way that you would like to track different pieces of metadata, the way you would like to categorize and roll this data up or filter it. So any of these views, you can have any number of views of your projects as you would like. In this case, we have some examples of by department, by application, by program, by manager, etc. And the idea is that it's really up to you how you would like to visualize this. It's highly configurable within the context of the system and without any customization whatsoever. Now, the idea here is that if you have separate tools that you're executing within, but you desire to have a singular intake process where there's requests or ideas that have to go through a vetting process, and that you want to decide what are the right projects to work on, or the ones that might deliver the best value to the organization or to your customer base. That can be done through a central place. So adding projects into this portfolio could be as simple as defining your different enterprise project types. In this case, it could be Agile, it could be more new product development, it could be a Six Sigma type of project, and you can define as many of these templates as you like. And the idea is you could simply just directly add those in here. Or you could actually go and actually have a centralized intake or request process, and this would include all your types of projects to go through investment approval. And the idea here from that request process, you can have a central place where you might even capture early ideas. I liken to the fact that you might get a request in this area. It's not yet in your portfolio. Maybe I get 500 requests, of which only 50 of them I'm really going to invest serious time into business case and analysis on that before we actually approve it. So this is a good place for us to capture early things like what we think the estimated benefits and costs might be. Maybe have people vote on it in kind of Yelp style. Maybe even put some early prioritization scoring in place in here to make that happen. And the idea is that a central place where people can do this, regardless of whether or not it's going to be executed in project or in an Agile tool, these types of things can come in so we can get the early factors that we'd like to get and capture around this. And these forms are totally configurable based on the criteria and the data and the elements that are important to you. The idea here is when the time comes, we can actually, through workflow approval or to promote explicitly by saying create a project, have these items then flow into and become one of those requested projects that gets promoted to the next stage over in the Project Center and Project Online. And that's what some of these may have come from, is from that request center. Now, at that point, we may want to get into some more serious business case development. For that purpose, we can then start expanding upon that, maybe doing some things from a strategic alignment perspective. So let's say, for example, we want to get into strategic impact. This is where you may have a consistent set of business drivers to where you say expanding into new markets and segments is a driver that maybe is 30% of the weight towards a total weighted score on valuing your projects. And then how well it aligns with each of these drivers would determine whether that score is higher or lower in response to all these different drivers that factor into a total value score. And it allows us to get some common valuation methods, so as we compare projects, obviously discretionary, we can force certain projects to happen, but as we're really looking to choose the things that add the most value to the organization and what we really should be doing, it gives us good objective measures to do that. And when we've done that, we can actually go into portfolio analysis. And by portfolio analysis, we can go in and say, let's do some scenarios to figure out what the best mix of projects are, both with our existing in-flight projects and the ones that we're considering. In here, what I'm seeing is a scenario whereby if I had a $4 million budget, given all the projects that I'm thinking about doing, for that $4 million budget, it's saying that I can only do about 66.13% of the value of that portfolio. If all the prospective projects I want to do represents 100% of the value, due to that strategic alignment and scoring that we did, it's determining what the highest values projects are and which ones we can do for this constraint of dollar of spend. And this is even contemplating with projects that we actually forced in or ones that we forced out to be included or not included into this scenario. It's doing efficient frontier modeling, which is basically saying that for any dollar value of spend, what's the best we can do from a value perspective out of this portfolio. Now you can also do other things like say, what if we asked leadership for another $1 million? What if that budget was $5 million? And all of a sudden I can get 83% of the value potentially out of this portfolio. And other projects are moved in and moved out as part of that scenario. We can also look at this thing from a resource constraint perspective, whereby I can come in and say, well, great, I can get 83% of the value out of this portfolio if I have the money. But do I have the resources to actually execute on this? And this is telling me based on the resources I have, if I don't hire another resource, it's saying that I can only get 53 or just under 54% of the value of that portfolio just on a resource basis. Now I can do other things, like I can stagger the projects by the dates on that which they happen to spread them out a little bit more. Or I could possibly go in here and say, what if I hired 6 more resources? And I can recalculate this portfolio based upon that. And this would actually give me some indications of the fact that if I have 6 more resources, I could actually get this number up to 72% of the value of that portfolio. And it can actually tell me in this scenario, and once again, I'm not impacting the core data while I'm doing these scenarios. The idea here is it's telling me these are the resources that I would need if I hired 6 more resources to get that 73% value. It tells me what I need, when I need them, and to what degree I need them. And this would give me an idea, you know, if I could contract or if I need to do a direct hire. And those types of things are things that we can do. But the point here is in a bimodal environment, you can put the agile and the non-agile or more traditional projects through the same intake governance process and then ultimately execute in the tools that you want. We'll get to that next step next. So for example, if I go back to my project portfolio, those of you that have done traditional project planning and scheduling in Microsoft Project, if I have a project here that I want to use and I'm going to just use Microsoft Project or Project Web Access, I can just come in here and I can say open the plan, and I can open it in Microsoft Project or in the browser in Project Web Access, which is the web equivalent that does all the basics of Microsoft Project in this browser, and I can do that right here natively within the solution. And I'm not going to spend the time to go into that today, but the idea here is where we add with Wickersoft's Project Connect is that through that connection we can choose to execute and track using the other tool sets right from within here. So let's just say our team is going to work on this Fabricam project and they want to execute on this using Visual Studio Team Services in the cloud. Through the Project Connect integration, we can select that project, and if I say open in Visual Studio, if the project didn't exist yet, it would go create it. If not, it will take me to it. But the idea is it's going to now take me to this project in Visual Studio. And here I'm actually in the backlog that's being managed by the team in Visual Studio. And here's where you can break out your product backlogs or your backlogs for epics, features, user stories, tasks, and bugs and things like that that are in here natively within the tool set in the tool that the team has decided they prefer to work in. On top of that, they can even plan their iterations. So they can plan their iterations and their sprints in here, so they can drag those backlog items into specific iterations. And typically, the teams are managing these things across a task or a storyboard, dragging them across the different states, which can represent progress that we translate and pass back to Project Online via Project Connect. Or you can even come in here and do other things in the work items themselves, like if you want to get holistic resource planning, you can actually put original estimates in here in addition to story points and things like that that people traditionally do in Agile to pass that back as resource capacity planning information or what's remaining or what's left to do. And the completed work can be captured in here and be passed as actuals back to Project Online. And this is what would actually get passed back as a timesheet entry back into Project Online, as we discussed in the slides as well. The key is that the team member does not have to leave Visual Studio in order to make all this happen, yet they can feed the needs of the PMO and of leadership in the portfolio management solution. So ultimately, if I come back to the Project Center and I go into the Fabricam project, I think most of you are probably used to seeing what a Microsoft project plan typically looks like. But now we're passing back data that typically doesn't exist in project. For example, now I'm looking at a project schedule view that is giving me the epic, feature, and user story breakout, right? So things that don't typically exist. We're bringing back from Visual Studio the fact that these items are epics, features, and stories, and then the tasks and bugs that are included within those. Or if I wanted to, I could just typically come in here and say, let me look at this from a sprint basis and see which items are in which sprints. So we look at the time boxes that are set up in those iterations or sprints, and then we're bringing that data in so that we can see this from a sprint perspective without having to go into the tool. Also notice that we're calculating the red, yellow, greens on whether or not things are ahead or behind schedule, so that when we go back to the portfolio or the project center, it is being translated into metrics that leadership wants to see on these things, because we're bringing that information back and translating it using the PPM tool to give you that, that differentiation. So leadership may not be interested in a velocity chart, but they are interested in how things are heading from a schedule perspective, a health perspective, a cost perspective, etc. So the idea is you get that visibility in there from that perspective. If you wanted to use something like JIRA, right, you can use that as well. So this e-commerce portal development project, if I come in here, if I have enabled the JIRA Connect from Project Connect, I can come in here and I can then open this up in JIRA. It's the exact same use case, we're just using a different tool. They're planning out their backlogs and their sprints in here. They're coming in and using their task or their storyboards in here. And then ultimately, when you come in here, they can actually come in and do things like log work. So putting actual time in here that would feed into the timesheet, etc. That can happen right from within here, just like it did with Visual Studio. So the use case is identical, really. And then the idea is that the information ultimately ends up back centrally in your portfolio management solution. Now, another great thing about doing this in Project Online is that it has a native capability in here as well. Wickersoft has created capabilities to do some agile planning within this Project Online context. So, for example, right here within Project Online, we can actually model and do within this. We can actually build a sprint schedule within the context of the Project Online solution. And here we're looking at a schedule of the time boxes of our different sprints that we're working on through there. We can also then manifest a product backlog. And so if we come in here, we can start building out that product backlog of epics, features, stories, etc., and track that backlog of items in here as we go on through. Waiting for it to render here. So the idea here is that you can come in here and then manage your backlog in a more agile fashion. As a finance manager, I want to view expense reports that are approved for payments so that I can track the status of all expense reports and basically create user stories, prioritization of those, and we'll talk about how you can do that from a drag and drop perspective, and we can align them with different releases and sprints and things like that. Okay. Ultimately, you want to go into an estimation board, and this is where you want to start getting into more of a board fashion, where you can actually see the priorities that we've assigned to these things by dragging them up and down through different priorities, and also maybe even doing t-shirt sizing on this, whether it's a small, medium, large, or extra large effort, and then being able to drag these items across the different elements of the storyboard. Okay? You can even prioritize your backlog using a priority manager in here. And in that case, you can take these items and drag them up and down so that you can prioritize very easily as you go on through to change your priorities of that backlog as you go on through. And ultimately, you get down to a level of detail where a user like myself in here might have items in a task board. And the idea they can then progress these items in a graphical fashion across that task board like we showed earlier on, and then be able to update this stuff graphically using a board type of metaphor as you would in the Agile tools. So this is some cool stuff that we add in that allows you to do some Agile capabilities directly within Project Online. Or if you're using another Agile tool, as we showed, through integration, we can bring that data in here as well. Now, from a reporting perspective, what's cool with Office 365 and with Project Online is there is an out-of-the-box web service or OData feed to Power BI. Meaning we can get reports that become a natural output of our execution and data updates within Project Online, and actually have them come and render these dashboards and reports just out of the box and automate on an automated fashion. What's cool here is you can start combining different metrics and types of data sets that you want. In this case, for example, I've got a dashboard which is this Agile PPM portfolio dashboard that has more traditional gauges on more traditional PPM metrics, kind of a PPM type of bubble chart that's looking at return on investment versus risk. I've got red, yellow, greens on my different portfolio items that are in here, etc. But also notice, look on the right. I've got some agile metrics on things like burn-ups and burn-downs, bug trends, cumulative flow diagrams on the user stories. I can have velocity charts and other things on here as well, meaning I have a combination of agile and non-agile metrics, meaning these reports can meet the needs of the way the teams look at the world from an agile perspective potentially, and also a way that leadership looks at things from a more traditional fashion. So the idea here is this type of reporting becomes a natural output of the process. And then as we go on through, you can look at this in a variety of different ways. So all different types of reports can be fashioned into here, including combined resource reporting. And in this combined resource reporting, what's nice about this is you can start doing a lot of different slicing and dicing through this. If I go and want to look at the filters that are available in here, I'm looking at capacity versus demand for all resources. But let's say I was just interested in my responsibilities as the head of the business analyst group. I can look at that and now start looking at the business analyst resourcing, look at the utilization across that group in more detail with some more supporting information for those graphs, and even look at the overall business analyst community as a whole and see that we do have capacity available, and even be able to drill down to the actual team members in there and actually see that maybe we shouldn't give Erwin any more work, he's already overloaded, and we have some folks with more excess capacity that we could put on the next effort or next project that goes in on that. Okay. So the idea is that this information becomes a natural output of the process. Now within the project online, you get that information as well, is because we're combining all this information from, say, Visual Studio, JIRA, etc., into that data set that comes into Project Online, we could actually get some views in here as well from a resource perspective. So natively within here, I could come in and I could say, let's look at that same business analyst community and then look at capacity planning in here. And here, right from within here, I could see very easily on the team, either from an FTE, an hours, or a day's perspective. In this case, it's FTEs. See who's over and under allocated and what projects they're on. Okay. I can also see, for example, from a graphical perspective, if I want to look at that same capacity demand within this, I can look at resource utilization, and I can go and say, okay, it looks like that view I had before about this is the same view, but right from within the tool set itself, I have a view about this business analyst team in total right within the solution. Also, from a resource assignment perspective, if I'm a functional or a resource manager, I can actually get a resource-centric type of schedule, meaning I can see everything my people are involved on. So, for example, if I took a look at Amy, I can see that she's on 3 projects. And if I want to look at the detailed schedule pieces that she's on any one of these projects, I can get into the actual schedule items that she's on in these projects and see how much stuff she's got going on in any particular time frame across all the projects she's working on. And this includes both the Agile and the non-Agile projects if we got the integration working, or if we're using the Agile tool natively within Project Online. Ultimately, if I'm a resource, I can now come into Project Online potentially if I work in here, and I can actually look and see everything that's on my plate. Notice that I have a My Work area that gives me the ability to have a time entered in here, which could also come from your Agile tool. But also notice I've got 2 Agile projects in here along with 2 Waterfall projects. So I got the holistic total workload that's expected of me all in one place, and gives me common visibility into what's expected of me. All right. So with that, let's go back to the presentation. Let's talk about some additional use cases. We talked earlier on, since this is tied in very tightly with Office 365, People get access to Office 365 Planner, which is more of a Kanban card style way to do lighter weight project management. So just like we talked about Visual Studio and JIRA as a source of information that can be fed into the portfolio, people can choose to manage their lighter weight projects in this kind of card-based Kanban style approach in Office 365 Planner and have that feed into the portfolio in the same fashion using Project Connect. Simplified task management, Wunderlist is available for that, as well as it's being replaced by Microsoft eventually here by Microsoft To-Dos, but that simple task management for simplified projects that don't require a lot of rigor, that can be used to funnel that in as well. We even have an ITSM or IT service management use case with things like ServiceNow, and we have a whole webinar that's available and a recorded one that's available for you to look at on our website if you want to see that use case in more detail. Ultimately, Project Connect, which is our cloud-based connection platform that sits in the Microsoft Cloud, is really what enables the integration seamlessly with the Agile tools we talked about earlier, with the lighter weight project management tools, and even financials, IT service management, or even your CRM systems if a lot of your opportunities are driving your projects and you would like to have that flow into your project management process. There's a lot of use cases that we can use with this Project Connect offering. So let's wrap up on some of the value and the benefits. The value of unified work management in this bimodal type of approach is it really keeps users working in their primary tools and solutions. Task switching is really identified by studies to say it's one of the biggest productivity drainers that we have in this fact as people are switching back and forth to different tools. They lose up to 40% of their efficiency by doing task switching. By keeping people in their primary tools and solutions, we can make them more focused and more efficient, as well as make it less frustrating for them to stay on top of all their work. It also allows users to work in tools appropriate for their role and maturity. So if their role is software development, why not stay in the software development tools? If they're using lightweight projects on the business side and Office 365 Planner works for them and just in that role, why not let them use that tool to execute on their projects if they're meeting the needs and feeding the portfolio? It also will help improve adoption risk by minimizing unnecessary complexity. If we keep it simple and keep people in the tools they're familiar with and they prefer, they're going to use it on a more consistent basis. And so better user experience will drive better participation and compliance with your solution, which ultimately drives success. And we talked about the silos and the walls and the barriers earlier in the presentation. If it enables better collaboration across all areas of the business, it's better for us in an execution and the way that we deliver both internally and to our customers. And the value of integration just brings portfolio alignment into the mix and make sure that we're in better alignment with our organizational goals and objectives. And holistic views on a common portfolio and resource views and capacity views are all now attainable on an automated basis. And ultimately, Project Connect, the way it's designed, can quickly and reliably bring together what are now disparate business systems. And hopefully, this will all allow for better forecasting and more realistic expectations and just improved, more streamlined governance for planning, executing, and reporting on our entire portfolio of work and projects. So just a little bit about us. You know, Wickersoft, we are a global company with a footprint in many different locations. We are a triple gold certified partner, which is a designation held by less than 1% of the Microsoft partners out there. We provide consulting services and value-added products in this realm. We have a rich history in project and portfolio management, collaboration and content, and just cloud productivity, and really extending that concept to overall work management. So we can help you with consulting support and products in that area, as well as we can help you with managed services, support, and even staffing if you like, because we have those aspects and business units within our company. Now, we focus on project and portfolio management as a discipline, as we talked about in great detail today, but it really is all about productivity solutions using the Microsoft stack and primarily the Microsoft Cloud these days. So project and portfolio management with Project, professional services automation with Microsoft Dynamics, which is the business solutions platform in the cloud for Microsoft, We talked a little bit about Visual Studio and Agile, but scaled Agile management using Visual Studio and other tools is definitely something that we have a great passion for. And then enterprise work management and collaboration, just using SharePoint-based solutions and innovations that we've come with, and tying that together with Power BI and the outputs and the business intelligence and analytics that we can provide out of that is something that we provide. So as you're thinking about Wickersoft or thinking about doing some of these things, think about us to kind of help you and maybe guide you in a little bit, both up front and maybe through executing on your actual projects. From a next step perspective, we do make these offers on a consistent basis to our folks here. We're actually willing to help you with a free assessment and roadmap of these capabilities. So whether it be traditional PPM, integration with your Agile, or how we make these things work together, we're willing to come in and or talk to you about how this might manifest itself and might play out within your organization, what it would take to do that on a no-charge basis. We can also help set you up in certain use cases with a trial of Project Online and potentially working with things like the VSTS, and have us support and handhold you through that as you evaluate whether or not this works for you. Also, this was a very general demonstration today, so if you want a personalized one-on-one demo, happy to schedule that with you as well and tailor it more to your use case and your business requirements. To reach out to us, you'll be all getting copies of these slides and a recording link to this presentation. But if you reach out to NA Sales, North American Sales, at Wickersoft.com, or you can reach out to me directly, we'll make sure that you get responded to. Also, you can go to our websites, and then we have a whole library of upcoming webinars and on-demand webinars at Wickersoft.com/webinars. So feel free to check those out. This will be up there very shortly after the recording gets put together and compiled. But the idea here is reach out to us, and there's a lot more resources to get more in depth with you on this. So with that, we're getting close to the top of the hour. I just want to thank you for your time and your attention today. Hopefully you got some value out of the information that was shared here today. And as I said, it's a very general approach that we try to get out here to kind of paint a vision for what's possible and what's here today. But if we can do a deeper dive and talk about this more specifically with how this might benefit your organization, we would love to talk to you. So with that, have a great day, and once again, thank you for your attendance.